Good afternoon, I'm Karen Holmes Ward. Sky-high prices, climbing interest rates. The housing crisis in Massachusetts is putting home ownership further and further out of reach for Massachusetts families. We begin today with 5 Investigates' Karen Anderson and new data showing not everyone is getting an equal shot at that dream home. 5 Investigates has uncovered shocking racial disparities in mortgage lending across the state. 70% of white families own a home in Massachusetts, compared to just 35% of families of color.
It's one of the worst racial homeownership gaps in the country.
Tom Callahan has seen this persistent problem throughout his 30-year career in the housing industry. But new data from his organization, the Partnership for Financial Equity, shows this is about more than home ownership. There's also a significant gap in who is getting approved for mortgages in the first place. The data for 2021, the last year available, shows Black and Hispanic applicants were denied mortgages at roughly twice the rate of white and Asian applicants.
We've been doing these reports for almost 30 years, and this denial rate disparity issue has been with us that entire time.
And even when buyers of color are getting mortgages, 5 Investigates has found they are often getting loans that are keeping them from being as competitive as they need to be in this red-hot home market.
The loan is designed to ensure that a broad range of people can still get access to the mortgage market, especially buyers that have historically been underrepresented.
Researcher Sharon Cornelison is talking about loans from the Federal Housing Administration. She studies trends in FHA loans and says while they're helpful, they can also hurt borrowers' chances of winning in the bidding wars.
They cannot waive appraisal, they cannot waive the inspection, their down payment is 3.5%. So it's really difficult for them to stand out in this competitive market, and they often lose out as a result.
Data shows Black and Hispanic borrowers are issued FHA loans at a rate of 4-to-1 over white home buyers. For Tom Callahan, the impact of all of this is clear.
I think every time you look for racial discrimination in a process like mortgage lending, you find it.
Another interesting note from this data, even families of color in the highest income brackets were often being directed to FHA loans. Now, to be clear, both Callahan and Cornelison stress that FHA loans can be the best product for many people. Joining me now is Boston City Councilor Kendra Lara. In a blog post, the Treasury Department cited a stunning statistic. The Black-white gap in home ownership rates nationally was the same in 2020 as it was in 1970, just 2 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Councilor Lara, what is Boston doing to narrow that gap?
I think we have to really be honest about the fact that the United States, and especially the city of Boston, has a long history of discriminatory lending practices, particularly towards our most marginalized communities. And what we're seeing now is really the world and what we've inherited as a result of historical redlining that we've seen in these communities. And so discriminatory lending from private banks for home ownership is really directly correlated to the issues of generational wealth and to really trying to close the racial wealth gap here in the city of Boston. I think one of the things that we don't talk enough about is how we prepare people to become homeowners. In the city of Boston, for example, renters represent the majority of residents, and all of our renters, for example, are in the market, but they're also burdened by rising rents. So right now we have 50% of renters in the city of Boston who are paying more than who are rent burdened, and that means that they're paying 30% or more of their rent. Now, why is that important when we talk about home ownership? When we talk about home ownership, we really need to look at how we transition people from being renters to being homeowners. And so we want to prepare people to, one, become homeowners. We need to stabilize our renters. Now, that does not solve the problem of discriminatory lending. That is something that I think that the city of Boston needs to take a very, very close look at. How are we really putting policies and practices in place to try to correct that issue that we're seeing here and to make homeownership more accessible? Now, here in the city of
Councilor Lara, you saw Karen Anderson's report. What is your takeaway from that data? What do you think needs to change so that more people of color can get mortgages and become homeowners? You talked about transitioning from rental to ownership, but aren't there other things that can be done?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that at the core, when I consider what needs to be done, what I want to look at is, one, how do we stop discriminatory lending practices, but also how do we make it easier for people to become homeowners? So the city of Boston has a lot of programming that really makes it easy for Black and brown people in the city to apply for housing and to really have access to affordable homeownership. So right now, for example, Mayor Wu has offered to give away free city land to developers who are going to build affordable homeownership in the city of Boston. And so there are ways that we can use what we have, our public resources, to make sure that we have more access to affordable homeownership options here in the city of Boston.
Many longtime city residents, as we know, getting priced out of Boston, unable to keep up with the rising cost of real estate. We talked about this as the segment opened, and they're looking elsewhere. Randolph, Brockton, Stoughton. Talk more about the actions that the city is taking to encourage people to stay in the city.
So I'm the chair of the Housing Committee on the Boston City Council, and one of the things that makes it incredibly difficult for people to stay here is the rising cost of rents and the rising cost to purchase homes. And one of the things that we really need to look at, and we've been looking, is our inclusionary development policy. That's one of the ways that we ensure that developers that are coming into the city are also giving back affordable rental housing. So right now, developers that build in the city of Boston are only required to build 13% of affordable units based on their projects. And so we have been working to change our inclusionary development policy to increase the production of affordable homeownership and rental units up to 20%. That is a plan that's currently being worked on. And I think that when we talk about affordable, our definition of affordable is also skewed because we use our area median income. But what a lot of people don't know is that the AMI, which is also used to look at affordable homeownership, is calculated by using 114 surrounding towns and cities, some that are much wealthier than the city of Boston. And so we have to really readjust what our definition of affordable homeownership is.
You know, a lot of focus has been given to the need for more affordable housing in the city, rent control in the city. But talk more, if you would, about what home ownership means for closing the racial wealth gap in Boston.
You know, I think that's an important conversation to have. And the reason why I say that is because the way that we do homeownership now makes it incredibly difficult to solely use homeownership to close the racial wealth gap. The lack of access to home ownership is not the only thing that created the racial wealth gap. And so when we try to look at our history, the history of redlining in the city of Boston, we didn't get here just because Black and brown people were having a hard time purchasing homes. And so making it easier and more affordable for people to purchase homes is also not going to close that racial wealth gap in a vacuum. We need to talk about economic investments. We need to talk about investments in education, and yes, home ownership, and yes, stabilizing renters, but ownership alone is not going to get us to where we need to go. When we talk about historically marginalized communities and how we ended up with this massive racial wealth gap here in the city of Boston, we need to look at every single one of those interventions and make sure that our policies are correcting and helping us get to where we need to go.
And Councilor Lara, as we close out this segment, if you would talk about some of the disparities that you see in District 6, which you represent.
Absolutely. District 6 is made up of largely of two very different neighborhoods, Jamaica Plain and West Roxbury. West Roxbury, for example, has the highest concentration of single family homes in the city of Boston, but it also has less than 1% of all of the affordable housing in the city. And so the reason why I bring that up is because zoning is very important. Exclusionary zoning makes it incredibly difficult for us to build housing in the city of Boston. And I think that in my district, in a place where Jamaica Plain, where we have much more diverse zoning areas, and it allows us to build much more affordable homes and renters, but also build affordable homeownership opportunities. It really shows how zoning has a massive impact on the amount of housing that we can build in the city. And that's one of the things that we see in District 6 is that people want to purchase homes, but there's not necessarily any stock available.
So much to consider. It's a very complex issue. City Councilor Kendra Lara, thank you for joining us today.